Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to share with you an absolutely incredible and transformative story. Meet Alaric Vance, an Air Force officer who literally faced death and came back to tell us something that challenges everything we thought we knew. During his experience, he encountered Jesus and received a shocking revelation about the true essence of love and existence. What he experienced on the other side will change his way of seeing life forever. Before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories, and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Now, get ready for a journey that will shake your beliefs and touch your heart. I'm Alaric Vance, a name that probably means nothing to you, and maybe that's for the best. For more than 10 years, I served in the United States Air Force, living a strict routine of discipline, logistics, and planning. I grew up in Kansas, in the heart of the country, where the sky was as wide as the expectations my father, Noah Vance, had for me. My father was a World War II veteran, a man of few words and firm convictions. For him, the universe was like an engine. Each part had its function. Everything was predictable, calculable. He believed in hard work and science as guides in life, and I, his obedient son, adopted the same philosophy. "Leave emotion to the weak and faith to the lost," he said, and I obeyed him. My Air Force career began as an adventure, but quickly became an extension of what I had always known, a world of rules, schedules, and relentless logic. In Seattle, where I was stationed the last few years, the mornings were gray, often marked by light rain that reflected the seriousness of my work. My role was to coordinate logistical operations for air missions, a job that required absolute concentration and left little room for distractions. If you had asked me back then about spirituality, I would have laughed. For me, life was a set of variables that could be controlled, adjusted, and, ultimately, resolved. Religion was for those who needed comfort, a buffer against uncertainty. I believed science could explain anything, until the day it completely failed. "Vance, you seem distracted," Colonel Ellis said one morning. He was my superior, a man with whom I maintained a cordial relationship. "Everything is fine?" "Yes, sir," I responded automatically. But in fact, something was wrong. I didn't know what. It was a vague feeling, like a pebble in your shoe that you can't find. At that time, I didn't know that my life was about to change forever, that the man who trusted only the tangible would be confronted by the inexplicable. If I had known, I would have lived that day more carefully, perhaps even with reverence. But I didn't know, and that's how my journey began. That morning in Seattle was like any other. The gray sky felt like a heavy blanket, and the rain fell at a steady pace, a familiar sound that I had learned to ignore. I was in my office at the airbase, surrounded by maps and documents detailing logistical operations for the coming weeks. Everything seemed normal, predictable, until it wasn't anymore. I felt slightly dizzy as I leaned over to write something down. Maybe I need coffee, I thought. Sleep was in short supply that week, but that was nothing new. We had a transport mission underway, and the pressure was constant. I ignored the discomfort and continued working, but the discomfort returned, this time accompanied by a strange tingling in my hands. "Alaric, are you okay?" asked Jeff Carter, a sergeant who worked with me. He was on the other side of the room, watching me with concern. "Yes, I just need a minute," I replied, but my voice sounded distant even to me. I got up to get a glass of water, but before I could take 2 steps, the ground seemed to tilt. My heart sped up, and a wave of heat rose through my body. I felt like something was wrong, deeply wrong. In a matter of seconds, everything went dark. The next thing I remember was the confusion of voices around me. The room was filled with people. Carter was shouting my name. Someone was calling for help, and the sound of rushing boots echoed down the hall. When I woke up again, I was lying on a stretcher, being taken to the ambulance. "Stay with us, Vance. You're going to be fine," one of the nurses said. Her voice was firm, but there was something in her eyes that told me she was less sure than she wanted to appear. I arrived at the hospital shortly after. A medical team began emergency tests, electrocardiograms, MRIs, blood tests. The diagnosis, however, was frustratingly vague. "There's nothing obvious that explains what happened," said Dr. Evelyn Monroe, the cardiologist on call. As she spoke, my natural skepticism began to mix with uneasiness. "What do you mean, there's nothing?" My body had failed in ways that science could not explain, and despite his clinical certainty, a part of me knew this was just the beginning. The doctors decided to keep me in the hospital for observation. Dr. Evelyn Monroe seemed concerned, but hid it behind a mask of professionalism. "We will continue to monitor your heart, Alaric. Sometimes the body plays tricks that we don't always understand immediately." I was not easy to convince. Even without a diagnosis, I was sure I would get out of there the next day. He was not someone who accepted standing still for a long time. This impatience was something my father said he inherited from him. That night, however, something strange happened. As I lay there, discomfort returned, first in my chest, then a feeling of crushing pressure that seemed to erase everything around me. The sound from the heart monitor beside me grew faster, then irregular, until a long, deafening beep replaced it. Suddenly there was no more pain. There was no sound. I was floating. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I looked down and saw my body, pale, inert on the hospital bed. Doctors and nurses ran around me, calling my name, administering defibrillators. It was a surreal scene, as if I were watching my own life from the outside. "Code Blue in room 14, shouted one of the nurses. I saw Dr. Monroe run in. She looked focused, but there was something in her eyes. Fear, frustration, maybe both. Then something called me. It was a light, soft at first, but soon it became all I could see. It was warm, comforting, irresistible. I was pulled by it, as if gravity had ceased to exist. The tunnel was alive, pulsating, with colors that I cannot describe. They were not just visible tones, but something I could feel, like sublime music that filled all my senses. There was a sweet scent in the air, something reminiscent of flowers, but that seemed to have a depth I had never experienced before. When I finally went through the tunnel, I came to a garden. But calling it a garden would be a gross simplification. It was a place of indescribable beauty, where every leaf, every petal seemed to shine with its own light. A crystal-clear river flowed in the distance, and the sky was constantly changing, like a living work of art. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone. In the center of that heavenly garden, a figure began to form. At first, it was just a light, a glow so intense that it seemed to envelop everything around me. But as I got closer, the light took the shape of a man. He looked simple, but he radiated a presence I had never experienced before, a mix of strength, wisdom, and love. "Do you know who I am, Alaric?" His voice wasn't like the ones I was used to hearing. It didn't pass through the air, but seemed to come from within me, filling every part of my being. "Jesus," I asked, my own voice sounding hesitant. I had never believed in religious figures. For me, Jesus was an abstract idea, a symbol more than a reality. But there, before me, he was real as I was. "Yes," he replied with a soft smile, "but not how you imagined." Looking at him, I felt a mix of emotions. He was at once familiar and indescribably mysterious. His eyes, deep and penetrating, conveyed infinite understanding. Every detail of his hands, his feet, his face, seemed to tell a story of love and sacrifice. "Why am I here?" I asked, still trying to understand what was happening. "Because you need to see it," he replied. Suddenly we were no longer in the garden. It was as if we were floating through memories, my memories. But there was something different. I was experiencing each scene through other people's eyes. I saw my childhood and the times I was harsh with my younger brother, Max, who only wanted my attention. I felt his sadness and rejection as if they were my own. I saw my years in the Air Force, when I treated the soldiers under my command coldly, ignoring their personal difficulties. I felt the weight of their frustrations and hurts. There were also moments of kindness, small gestures that I didn't even remember, helping a lady with her shopping on a snowy day, comforting a friend in a difficult time. Reliving these actions made me understand something that Jesus confirmed with a simple look. Every act matters. "You lived by trusting logic but ignored the essentials," he said. "Love is the true force of the universe. It is what connects all things." Back in the garden, I fell to my knees. "What do I do with this?" I asked, feeling crushed by the weight of what I had learned. "Choose love, Alaric," he replied. "And remember, your journey is not over yet." The moment Jesus spoke those words, "Choose love," the garden seemed to pulse with a new energy, as if every leaf, every drop of dew, and every ray of light were vibrating in tune with that truth. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a revelation that seemed to alter the fabric of my being. "Why me?" I asked, still kneeling. my voice shaking with emotion and doubt. Why show this to me, someone who never believed in anything other than what I could see and touch? Jesus approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. The touch wasn't physical, but it seemed to envelop my soul in comforting warmth. Because even the most skeptical among you is part of the whole. You are not separate from the love that connects everything. And your choices, Alaric, have a greater impact than you imagine. He stretched out his hand, and images formed in the air as if the sky itself were a living canvas. I saw seemingly insignificant moments. A driver holding the door for another, a child offering a toy to a crying friend, a woman caring for an injured stranger on the street. Each of these small acts radiated a light that spread, touching other lives, generating waves of kindness. Every thought, word, and action has consequences that transcend the moment in which they occur. Jesus explained, "The universe is a web where everything is connected. What you do for another, you do for yourself." My heart sank as a new vision emerged. I saw scenes of human suffering, wars, hunger, loneliness. What about evil? I asked. Why does it exist if love is so powerful? Evil is not a force opposed to love, he replied. It is the absence of love, the disconnection. It is often caused by choices made out of fear or selfishness. But suffering also teaches. He guides the soul back to love, if it is willing to listen. The visions continued, showing the impact of choices made out of love and compassion. One of them touched me deeply. I saw a man save a wounded soldier on the battlefield, risking his life. It was my father, Noah, in his youth. That moment of courage reverberated, illuminating paths he didn't even know he had touched. Finally, Jesus looked at me, his expression filled with love and seriousness. You still have a choice, Alaric. Live as before, or live in alignment with the love you felt here. Your journey on earth is not over. But remember, there is no small action when it is guided by the heart. When Jesus spoke the final words, "Your journey on earth is not over," the garden around me began to slowly fade away. The pulsating light that radiated from everything seemed to retract, as if the universe was preparing my return. I felt a mixture of fear and resignation. Part of me wanted to beg to stay, but a greater force pulled me back. "Wait!" I screamed, trying to grab something, anything. How will I remember all this? What if I forget? Jesus just smiled, a calm smile that seemed to carry centuries of wisdom. You won't forget what matters, Alaric. Now go. Suddenly, I was enveloped by a feeling of falling. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it gave me the impression of going through layers and layers of reality. The tunnel of light reappeared, this time faster and more intense, until, like the sound of a muffled explosion, I opened my eyes. The environment was cold and sterile. He was back in the hospital bed. The first thing I saw was Dr. Evelyn Monroe, leaning over me. Sweat glistened on her forehead, and she looked relieved but exhausted. "Welcome back, Vance," she said with a heavy sigh. "You gave us quite a scare." The room was full of movement. Nursing, assistants, and another doctor walked away, muttering among themselves. The heart monitor next to me showed a steady rhythm, and the pressure in the atmosphere seemed to decrease as the professionals left the room. "How long?" My voice came out weak, a whisper more than a question. 5 minutes, Evelyn replied. His heart stopped for 5 minutes. "I honestly don't know how you're here right now talking to me. Should be dead." His eyes stared at me, carrying a mix of fascination and doubt. He didn't say anything more than that, but there was something about the way he looked at me, as if he knew something inexplicable had happened. I looked around, trying to process everything. The fluorescent lights seemed dull compared to the heavenly glow it had just left behind. The sound of the machines sounded distant, almost like a hum. But the biggest difference was in me. Everything looked different. That room, with its mundane details, now had a subtle beauty that I had never noticed before. Every breath he took felt like a miracle. As I rested, I realized that life as I knew it had changed forever. I had come back, but I would never be the same. When I woke up in that hospital bed, I realized that something deep inside me had changed. Everything seemed more alive. The sound of the machines, the pale glow of the fluorescent lights, even the cool touch of the sheet beneath my hands. It was like I was seeing the world with completely new eyes. But at the same time, a persistent question echoed in my mind. How do I live with what I know now? The first few days after my discharge were confusing. My mind was torn between the vibrant memory of the heavenly garden and the monotony of the physical world. Returning to the airbase didn't help. My colleagues greeted me with a mixture of relief and suspicion. "So, what happened, Vance?" asked Jeff Carter, one of the few who seemed genuinely concerned. "You just fell hard. Any explanation?" I looked at him hesitantly. How could I explain something that even I didn't fully understand? I decided to omit the most extraordinary details. Nothing conclusive yet. Maybe stress or fatigue, but even this vague answer seemed insufficient to him. "Well, take care of yourself. We need all of you." The real test came with my father, Noah. When he heard about the incident, he flew to Seattle to visit me. Sitting in my kitchen, he watched my face with critical eyes, while drinking a coffee that he insisted on complaining was too weak. "So," he began, breaking the silence, "I heard you had an experience, shall we say, out of the ordinary." I hesitated. My father was always the epitome of skepticism, and I knew that any mention of what had actually happened would be dismissed as delusion, but something inside me refused to be silent. "Dad, I saw something that changed everything." He raised an eyebrow. "Everything changed, huh? How convenient. I have been to a place I cannot describe in words, and I found someone, Jesus." The laugh he let out was short and bitter. "Jesus, of course. You spent years trusting logic and science, and now you come up with this story of visions and miracles. What happened to my son, the man I raised?" His skepticism cut deep but didn't surprise me. What bothered me most was the doubt that his reaction planted in me. Was everything I experienced real? As the days passed, these doubts were challenged by a truth that manifested itself in an indisputable way. I could no longer live the same way. Something in me had been transformed, and it would guide me away from the life I had always known. The internal conflict and external reactions began to weigh on me. It was impossible to ignore that my life no longer aligned with the military career I had dedicated more than a decade to building. The uniform, once a second skin, now felt like a prison. The discipline that I always considered a virtue became a soulless routine, devoid of meaning after everything I had experienced. One day, sitting in my office on base, I looked at the stacks of reports and logistics plans. The rain pounded on the windows as it always did in Seattle, but this time the sound seemed amplified, as if nature itself was trying to remind me of the heavenly garden and the words of Jesus. "Choose love, Alaric," echoed in my mind. It was at that moment that I made the most difficult decision of my life. I was going to leave the Air Force. I called a meeting with Colonel Ellis to announce my decision. He listened silently, his expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Vance, are you sure about this? Your career is on the rise. You can achieve much more here. With all due respect, sir, I need to take another path. There's something I need to do, something bigger than myself." He frowned but nodded. "I always thought you were pragmatic, but now I see there is something more to you. I hope you know what you're doing." I left the base weeks later without looking back. It was a relief, but also terrifying. For the first time in years, I didn't have a clear plan. I just knew I needed to share my experience and the lessons I had learned. My first attempt was through writing. I began to put on paper everything I had experienced, every detail of the tunnel of light, the garden, the words of Jesus. But words seemed insufficient, unable to convey the depth of what I felt. It was then that I reconnected with Sophia Keller, a childhood friend who always had a latent spirituality. Sophia listened to my story without judgment, with an attentiveness that was rare. "You need to talk about this, Alaric," she said. "People need to hear what you experienced." With her encouragement, I started giving small talks in local communities. At first, reactions were varied. Some people cried with emotion, while others, like my father, dismissed it all as an illusion. But regardless of the reactions, I felt like I was fulfilling a greater purpose. My life had completely changed, and for the first time, I was at peace with that. My mission to share what I experienced began hesitantly. The first talks were small, almost intimate, in community halls and local churches. Sitting in front of a dozen attentive faces was, in some ways, more intimidating than leading a team in the Air Force. But when I started telling the story, something magical happened. The words flowed, not as if they were mine, but as if they were guided by a greater force. "I was not a man who believed in miracles," he began, looking at the audience. "All I valued was logic, science, control. But when my heart stopped for 5 minutes, I was confronted with something that all the science in the world couldn't explain. I saw a garden, a place where everything vibrated with love, and there, I found Jesus. People's reactions were always intense. Some were crying, as if something in my story resonated deeply. Others, skeptical, stared at me with narrowed eyes, clearly trying to decide whether I was a visionary or a charlatan, and I accepted all reactions with humility, because I knew that my message was not to convince, but to touch those who were ready to hear it. Among the questions they asked me, one was recurring. How do you know it wasn't a dream? A hallucination caused by a lack of oxygen? I always responded the same way, because everything in that place was more real than here. The touch of the flowers, the light, the music, it was as if my senses were expanded, and the essence of love was something tangible. It was not an illusion, it was the truth. My story began to reach a wider audience when I was invited to speak at a spiritual conference in Portland. It was there that I met Pastor Elias Grayson, a man who had exchanged his career as a fighter pilot for a life dedicated to faith. He became a mentor, someone who understood the difficulty of reconciling the physical world with spiritual truths. "You're doing what you're supposed to do, Alaric," Elias said, after listening to my talk. "Your story has the power to awaken sleeping souls." From that moment on, my mission gained strength. I started traveling, speaking at universities, churches, and events. More and more people were coming to me, sharing their own experiences or seeking answers. I knew not everyone would believe me, but that didn't matter. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just living what Jesus had taught me, choosing love and spreading it wherever I went. Over the months and years that followed, my life became a constant journey of learning and sharing. The lectures that initially attracted a few dozen curious people began to grow in number and impact. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about delivering the message entrusted to me in that heavenly garden. Once, after a talk in Chicago, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice breaking, "your story gave me hope. I was on the verge of giving up on life, but your words reminded me that there is still something bigger worth fighting for." Moments like these reminded me of the renewed purpose Jesus had planted in me. It wasn't just a mission to tell my experience, but to inspire love, compassion, and connection in a world that often felt desolate and disconnected. My transformation also began to reflect on my personal relationships. My father, Noah, remained skeptical, but over time he began to listen to me with less judgment. One night, as we sat on the porch of his house in Kansas, he said something that took me by surprise. "I don't know if I believe everything you say, Alaric, but I've never seen you so alive. Maybe there's something to this." With Sophia Keller by my side, I found constant, unwavering support. She became not just my friend, but a partner in the mission, helping me organize speaking engagements and connect with communities that needed to hear my story. His presence was a reminder that no one walks alone, but the biggest transformation was within me. That rigid man, who once despised what could not be measured or explained, had surrendered to the beauty of the unknown. I came to see the world as a daily miracle, from the simplicity of a flower blooming to the complexity of a human connection. My final message in each talk was always the same. You don't have to have a near-death experience to understand the importance of love. It is already inside you, waiting to be experienced. Choose love, choose compassion, and most of all, remember that every life, every act, every thought is connected by a force greater than we can understand. Now, as I write these words, I understand that my experience was just the beginning of something bigger. My journey on earth continues, and each day is an opportunity to spread the light I saw in that garden. My life is not perfect, and challenges still exist, but my soul is at peace. I finally understood what it means to be truly alive. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.